Welcome to the Wonder Women's Collective podcast. I'm your host, Gracie Hins, and this is the first episode of 2025 and kind of a loose kickoff to our season two. I'm super excited that you're listening, and there are some very exciting things coming up this year. Without further ado, this is Kara Folkerts. I really enjoyed this conversation. I have listened to this episode probably 4 times already, and every time I listen to it, I feel like I get something new and inspiring. I really hope that you enjoy it.
Yeah, if you want to just jump into who you are and what you spend your time doing.
Sounds great. So my name's Kara Folkerts. I'm originally from Canada, and grew up in central Alberta, and quickly kind of moved out, went to university. Didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to be outside, traveling and moving my body, and somehow making that work.
Yeah.
And was looking into environmental science courses. Was looking into guiding, hospitality, tourism, all different stuff. And then I found an ecotourism and outdoor leadership program in Calgary, uh,
Mhm.
where I am right now, actually. And it just kind of fit the bill of having touch on sustainable tourism, ecotourism, community based travel and stuff like that. But then also backcountry skiing courses and mountaineering,
Yeah.
rock
Yeah.
climbing. And it kind of scratched the itch of everything, and biology and geography and all the things. So took that over 4 years and still didn't really know how or where I want to kind of pursue it because it was quite a broad degree that then I could kind of funnel into whatever I'd want to do specifically.
Mhm.
And still didn't really know, but I've always kind of been a big runner. I started running cross country and track when I was 10 years old, and really enjoyed that. And I don't know where I kind of found out about running trips. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
fun. Just getting to travel the world and be a guide running and everything. And I think I don't really have. I know you were talking about untraditional ways, and I feel like my life is very unconventional, and even my approach into it. And it's funny because I feel like I went to this degree that then kind of dovetailed into me being a full time running guide.
Yeah.
But my way about it was very kind of haphazard and honestly, I know I'm still young, but I'm the older I get, I realize that nobody knows what the heck they're doing, and we're all just figuring it out.
Mhm.
I very much feel that. And the more I say this to people, I'll be saying it to someone in their 60s, and I was like, oh, yeah, same for you. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I finished the degree. And at that point, I kind of had a few contacts, and I started run guiding once a year with a friend in Costa Rica. So
Okay.
1 week of the year, which is obviously not enough to
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not enough, but it was getting my foot in the door a little bit, getting experience. I was vastly underpaid to start, but I think at that point it's you don't really care. You're just give me
Mhm.
the experience. It's
It's
great.
fun.
Yeah, exactly. So did that, and and I really enjoyed it. Got to meet some really cool people. And kind of, yeah, I think from there, a lot of it was word of mouth. But I still didn't want to start working right away. And my partner at the time and he was in similar or in the same degree, and we ended up selling everything after university. Not that we bought, but we
Mhm.
sold everything, and basically our plan was to bike around the world over 3, 4 years. So we started in Calgary, and we biked up to Anchorage, Alaska, and then flew to the northeast corner of Russia and cycled through kind of Russia, kind of through Siberia region down into Mongolia, and then we finished in Beijing, China, and that was going to be the first stint of our trip. When we got to Beijing, we packed up the bikes, and yeah, it was probably just under 11,000 kilometers over 6.5-ish months. And then our whole plan was to move to Japan. We got a working holiday visa, work to ski season,
Mhm.
um, and then we were going to just save up some money and continue biking. And then we ended up breaking up in Japan, and I think he stayed in Japan a little bit longer and then came back to Canada. And then unknowingly, I did the very eat, pray, love thing, and I went to India by myself. Went and got my yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Bali, and I didn't
Yeah.
even know it at the time, but it was really really good. And I think it was just nice to get myself kind of out of my comfort zone in different ways.
Mhm.
I knew at the time I didn't want to continue bike packing. and just kind of wanted to do something different, something for me and everything. I think meditation was always a really big thing for me. I still have imposter syndrome being a yoga teacher, and I don't teach that often, but it more so is just kind of for my own practice. It's great to do that in India. And then I was teaching in Indonesia for a while. And then I was probably gone for about 15 or 16 months. And yeah, this is like me not working. This is me just like figuring stuff out in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I worked in Japan a little bit, and it's funny because I think a piece of me when I was younger was like, oh man, this is good, but like I need to like get a real job or like
Right.
more normal. And at the same time though, I feel like me like or us, my partner and I at the time doing this bike trip in Russia and everything, we had so many people telling us like, no, this is impossible. You can't do this. Or like, when you
Mhm.
and kind of in a sense almost grow up. And like, not that
Mhm.
they're saying that like blatantly. But I think it was just really powerful for me to kind of say or to see that like there isn't one right way to do life. And like everyone just has to figure it out with what works best for them. And I think people are so good at shoulding on other people and kind of like, you should do this, you should get a
Yeah.
job, you should do this. Um, and there was a ton of challenges, and I don't want to like sugarcoat that this is just like easy and everything is wonderful. But I still feel like it just felt really good to kind of be like following what felt good at the time and
Mhm.
just kind of aligning those values. Um, so just learning so much along the way. And then I did end up coming back to Canada. Was super broke, so I worked at a microbrewery for a little bit. And then I ended up just trying to save up some money and then didn't want to stay in Canada and everything. So I ended up moving to Guatemala and just studying Spanish for a little bit.
Mhm.
I think I did one or two more running tours in Costa Rica in between those times. And then COVID hit, and I was living in Guatemala at the time. Had no idea what to do. I was supposed to be guiding another retreat in Costa Rica, which obviously got canceled. But yeah, then I came back to my parents for in the first couple months of COVID, and I pretty much just did like 1,000 or like seven. I think I did 17 or 18,000 piece puzzles over and over again.
Oh my
And that's
goodness.
like all I did. I was like puzzled and watched The Office for a couple months, and I was like, this is not good. So, and
Yeah.
then that summer is when I linked up with Aspire, which who
Okay.
now guides with and everything, and
Yeah.
doing more of the ultra run guiding.
Yeah.
That was so fantastic, and I think that really kind of got my foot even more in the door. But aside from getting my foot in the door of like run guiding, I just feel like I grew so much as a person, and I do very much attribute that to my boss at the time too.
Mhm.
Just from the get go, was just kind of like he empowered me so much, especially being a female guide. I feel like sometimes um, can get in funny, not in funny situations, but I think people maybe don't look up to you as much being like, especially at the time I was maybe like 24 or 25,
Yeah.
female
Yeah.
guy and everything, and maybe not taking like what I would say about like the mountain terrain or something to heart versus
Mhm.
like what the man next to me, the other guide, would say. And I was like, but we'd say the same thing. So it was always a funny thing, but my boss was just so empowering, and he's like, no, 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 like you got this, take the reins and
Mhm.
everything. So I grew so much as a guide. Um, over the course of those summers. And then I think I did with them over because it was seasonal work, over 2 or 3 summers. And then I would usually go to South America during the winters and just kind of hang out, grabbed a few like remote jobs,
Yeah.
a lot of running. I went and got my 500-hour yoga teacher training in Colombia. Yeah, just kind of piecing things together. And I think that kind of time, maybe it was like 2020 to 2022 or three, it was a lot of piecing, like months of like, I can work with this company for a month and then like maybe throw in that yoga retreat here. And so it was a lot of
Yeah.
freelance guiding, which was nice because it had a lot of diversity. But it also was like planning your life all the time, and I'm just like, it's exhausting. That's why
Yeah,
even
I was gonna ask, like, how do you deal with, like, calendar syndrome? And I feel like that's, like, one of those things where, like, when it's like, "Okay, I really need to figure out, like, how all of these things piece together," that's when it gets really overwhelming rather than, like, "Okay, I can look at my whole year and have, like, super specific dates."
that's honestly like even me being just house sitting in Calgary for this month and me not wanting to get on an airplane. One of the most exhausting parts of it is just life logistics and like planning, like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm gonna be here for this week, and then I have one day. Where am I gonna sleep that night? And where do I get here and here and here? And like when you're doing it with all the different companies too, there's just like, oh,
Yeah,
I can do this tour and that tour, but then they overlap on that day, so I can't
yeah.
actually be. So it was a lot. And it was funny then because I went back to Colombia, I think in 2022, and I had the company I work with now reach out to me. I'd reached out to them like 5 years prior saying I was interested.
Mhm.
They said they weren't hiring, but they would save my resume. And you just kind of roll your eyes. You're like, yeah, sure, you save my resume. And they ended up saving my resume.
Oh, wow.
Reaching out to me like 4 years later or something like that, wanting to hire me. And at that point, then I had so much more experience run guiding. And that's who I work with currently. And I've now been able to work because we do trips kind of all throughout the globe. So now it's not so much seasonal work. It's kind of like I have work pretty much every single month now. So it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to kind of manage. And it was really hard because I worked with a lot of fantastic companies before that I didn't really want to say goodbye to and everything. I think it was really hard just growing really strong friendships.
Mhm.
I think mentally just focusing kind of on one has felt a lot easier versus trying to piece it all together and everything. And
Yeah. So has that been, like, the last 2 years that you've been mostly with that company?
I'd say 2.5, 3. I think I'm coming into my 3rd year.
Okay.
So and it's myself and then one other guy from Chile, and we're kind of the 2 lead guides. So, it's a lot. He does a lot of the Europe, some in South America, and then I do all of our Africa trips, a couple in Europe, and then Mexico and Canada.
Okay.
So, and it's funny because the running company I work with now runs like lower kilometers or lower distance than maybe what I did when I was doing the ultra running trips, where it was like 30 miles a day for like 4 days straight. And now it's
Mhm.
maybe around the like, I guess it depends the tour, but like maybe 8 to maybe like 12 or 13 miles a day, but they're longer trips. Uh,
Mhm.
but I was like, okay, the running part is honestly, I'd say like the easiest part. And because it's like you just gotta like go out on the trails and have fun and like get excited with people. But it's
Yeah.
like little logistics in between, always being on with people. And I love, like, I feel so fortunate. We have such fantastic clients. But just being on like the moment you wake up until like the moment you go to bed for with people for like 10, 11 days straight can be a lot.
Yeah, I know that's a lot. And are you doing those, like, back to back where it's just, like, 3 weeks of, like, 1 week trips?
Yeah, so now normally we try and do them back to back because say like if I'm flying all the way to Morocco, it doesn't make sense for me to just do one trip and then go
Fly back. Yeah.
somewhere else or whatever. Even though I don't have a home base and wouldn't necessarily come back to Canada, still just kind of like being in that in between. So it makes more sense for us to fly guides out and then do 2 trips back to back. So it'd be like my next trip is in February and it's like 11 days and then I have 2 days off and then 11 days again with the
Mhm.
next trip. So, but I honestly feel like it's been like, I do feel like I feel so lucky that we just have such fun people come on our trips. And I honestly do think if you're signing up to go on a running holiday, you're like somewhat a hardy person. 'Cause
Yeah,
most
you
people are
you
just
meet
like
that
signing
threshold.
up. Probably the most special and something that's just I've really, really enjoyed is every single country I do work in. I do Morocco, Kenya, South Africa. I used to do Slovenia a little bit with Iceland, Albania, Montenegro, Canada trips, Mexico. I think right now, I think those are the ones I do. I don't think I missed anything. But uh, but between all of those, every single country we do a trip in, it's of like utmost importance that we're working with locals. And
Yeah.
largely because I don't want to be like the blonde white lady in Morocco telling you like, oh, this is everything about Morocco. Like I think even just ethically, I don't think that sits with me. And
Mhm.
I mean, I can definitely like I know different facts and can share a lot of information about the places that I've been to so much. But I can't really speak to that lived experience. And I think that's something that It's just so special having then our local partners that we work with on the trips with our runners, and then also as guides. Selfishly, it's like I feel like I have like wonderful families in all these different countries now, like going to like family weddings and taking their kids to school and stuff like that, which I think has just been one of my favorite pieces of now working these like international running trips. So
How do you guys partner with the locals? Is it like you're a primary guide and then you have like two guides from Morocco come in and help
yeah,
us
so
with that?
it changes in each place. But I think before we try and build out any trip, it really is just like trying to make local contacts. And that's something
Mhm.
that takes time too. It's not like you can just show up and be like, hey, like, I want to
Come
hire
make
you.
your peer.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like I think we really want to like make these strong bonds. So that can take
Mhm.
years. The company's been running for over a decade now. So that's one thing that I think they've just really, really prioritized. And now I'm a big piece of that and everything and just trying to yeah, continue those like person to person relationships and everything. So,
Yeah.
because I know it's funny because I feel like it is like it's work, it's a company, it's business. But for me, I'm just like, it's people, it's culture, it's immersion, it's like connection. And that's like at the heart of what it really is. And I really, really try and explain that to people too, that it's like, you're not just like another client or customer.
Mhm.
No, no, no. Like you're having this like very immersive experience here. And like, how can you slow down enough to like just really like realize how lucky we are to be running these beautiful places and like meeting these people and getting to
Yeah.
make friends and yeah.
No, that's really cool. And that's like the whole guide piece of it too, of like you're not just taking people from point A to point B. It's okay, how are we experiencing this together? How do you like I mean, I guess kind of bring up that like home base question. Like how is it that you've kind of like settled into the identity of like, okay, I'm more of like a nomad or like I don't have like having that choice of like I don't have a home base. And I feel like this is like a very, very multifaceted question.
It's a very good question that I still have to think. Honestly, I think this has been because I have not had a home base for the last 8 years, and
Yeah.
I've really just been moving from place to place, between guiding trips or bike packing, or like just even if there's like, hey, I have a month off, like I'll just like rent an apartment somewhere or
Yeah.
Airbnb somewhere, whether it's like South Africa or staying in Slovenia longer or whatever it
Mhm.
is. And it's been so wonderful. But I think in the last year and a half, it is a question that I have very much been at a tug of war with. And I think the
Yeah.
big thing is um it's it's oh man, I feel like I could go on 1,000 different tangents, but I think the
No,
thing
please do. I want all of them.
yeah, I think the one thing that is really hard and I think has really hit me in the last year and a half is I'm 29 now, I'm going to be 30 in a couple months or whatever, and just realizing that like the sense of community and like that depth in relationships
Mhm.
I think is something that I've really, really been that hasn't maybe taken like so much of a forefront, like or a focus in my life.
Mhm.
And that's something that I very much, I mean, it has, but it hasn't. Not to the level of depth, I'd say. Firstly, I'll say like dating and relationships is near impossible. um, but but I would just say like I'm with people all the time, and I'm very much like I want to cut through the bullshit. I want to get to know who you are. I want to like be vulnerable and really connect
Yeah.
and that's something that's super important to me. But that's a really hard thing to have. And I think just the consistency of like friendships and you that come with just like being in one place and building that over time.
Mhm.
I think that's one thing then that's really kind of made me wrestle with like this sense of like freedom and I can go around wherever and do all I want. But then I think and like all these opportunities and everything. But then I think there's this piece of like you're also missing this opportunity of like depth in a lot of things that do like relationships take time, building friendships take time, and that's not something that you can
Mhm.
just like go somewhere for a month and then pick up and like leave and go. And I think
And then
that
just like come bop back to and then go bop another place.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's one thing that's been nice now about the guiding trips that I do is even though I guide in all these different countries, at least I'm going back to the same families. So now I have this like weird unconventional sense of community. But it still does feel like I get really emotional now every time I leave and I'm just like, no, I'm not ready to say goodbye and like not until like next spring or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that has very much been like this sense of like, what would it look like to potentially try and have a home base that then I'm still guiding, but I at least come back to and like even drinking out of my own coffee mug and like
Mhm.
getting to go to like the same yoga studio or something and just like build in kind of that community. And I think one piece that also feels is like I want to be able to give back into a local community that I feel a part of.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's something that has very much kind of had these like wheels turning in my head of like what that is going to look like longer term. Um, if it was as easy as me just like being able to buy a property in the mountain towns that I want to be in
Then
years ago,
yes.
with like house prices,
Yeah.
um, whether it's in America or Canada, like it's the same deal here.
Yeah.
It's like it is every place that I would love to be is just not.
It's so expensive, and then if you're never there, then it's like you can't justify it.
Yeah, and then I'm just like, hey, if I like I could afford to rent someplace, but then I'm just giving my
Mhm.
money to rent somewhere. And if I buy a place, then it's like, okay, I could have someone rent out while I'm gone. But to get into the housing market right now and everything, as much as I've been saving, it still is just an impossible task. So,
Yeah.
one thing I did do actually a week ago, I bought a truck and a camper. I had
Oh,
never owned a vehicle in my life because
wow. That's
like
huge.
yeah, I it's funny. I've had my license for 14 years, I think, and I when I bike commuted when I was in university and everything, and
Mhm.
I just started traveling right away. That I was like, it's never made sense for me to have a vehicle, and I still am not in Canada enough that I'm like, oh man, like I'm going to use this all the time. But it's so funny because when I'm traveling, I feel like independent. I just go do whatever. Like I'm totally thriving, and then when I come back, I'm like. If I stay at my parents', then I don't have a vehicle, and all of a sudden, if I wanna, like, talk about, like, trying to go on a date with someone, and I'm like, "Hey, can I,
Yes.
like, borrow the minivan to go on a date right now?" It's like your autonomy and, like, sense of freedom is completely zapped.
That is such a tough feeling of like, okay, I like am here, but I'm not really here. And then like you can't really quite go about your same life routines too, where it's like, I don't really want to just do yoga like in my room. Like I'd rather be in the living room, but then my parents are gonna bug me and want to talk to me, which is great and lovely, and I'm so happy that they want to, but then it's like it's just not you're not in the same control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just such a contrast, and yeah, like, nothing against my parents, like, I'm very grateful that, that is always an option, but it is just yeah, it's such a big contrast when you're traveling and just, like, completely independent in a foreign country, and then you're coming back and being like, "Okay, so where am I
Yeah.
doing?"
How did I get here again?
So yeah, I bought a little truck camper, and again, like I'm still like I'm gonna be in Morocco in February, but it's worked out quite nicely now with the kind of position where I'm still guiding
Mhm.
full time, but now it's like I can guide for a month and then have off for a month and guide for a month and have off for a month, and I work remotely for the company.
Okay.
It's like this month that I'm technically off of guiding, I'm still working
Mhm.
everything, but then can kind of bop around. So I think having the truck camper, especially getting to spend some more time in North America in the summer, definitely looking forward to spending more time on the West Coast and everything. So
Yeah.
more in the mountains there. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. No, the truck camper is definitely a good move.
yeah. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. If you were gonna like, is there anywhere that you do feel like is kind of like calling you of like, okay, I do want to have more roots here, or just kind of not
Yeah,
even entertaining that all the way?
it's funny because I go so back and forth. Like I'm just like,
Mhm.
no, 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 I'm gonna do this forever, and then it's like, no, I don't know, maybe I do. And I think long term, I do want a place for sure. And I think for a long time, I did think like, oh, I could like get a digital nomad visa in Spain or like work long term in Thailand or something. But I think the more I've been traveling and the more I've been coming to Canada, I'm like, oh, Canada does still feel like home. And like the mountains here
Yeah.
are stupidly wonderful. Like they're so good. And it's really, really hard to beat. So I definitely feel that pull. And like somewhere maybe in the mountains of BC is ideal.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'd want to be like way on the West Coast, mostly because I'm someone who I grew up in a very sunny part of Canada. So
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
the West Coast, Pacific Northwest is
Yeah.
not but like interior, um, I can definitely see kind of like in that kind of area and everything. So, but honestly, I was having a conversation with a friend recently that I think really was very, very impactful, and it was this idea of like if you're like say building out a product or a service or whatever, you're always like testing it, and then if it doesn't work, you're reiterating it, and then if it works, you're
Mhm.
testing, reiterating, and just kind of um, putting that into comparison to like us and our livelihoods. It's just like
Yep.
whole life is just an experiment, and we're like trying to figure out, and like you can just test something
Mhm.
out, and like if it doesn't
It
work, then
stops working, stop
yeah,
doing it, change it.
exactly. Yeah, I think that was one thing. Even with me, like buying the truck camper, it's like it's something I talked about for years, but I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know, and trying to like make this right decision of like, should I buy an apartment? Should I buy a vehicle? Should I just like be a completely nomad? Should I move to Thailand? Should I do all this stuff? And I was like, wait,
Mhm.
actually, just instead of just being like so frozen by all these decisions that I'm not making any actual choice and I'm just like staying stuck, I'm like, I can just try something out. And like maybe after with the truck camper, I'm just like, this is totally not what I thought it would be. I can sell the truck and I can sell the camper and I can move to Spain if I want or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and just kind of this like constant looking at our lives of like, you don't need to make a decision with the like putting so much pressure that it needs to be like the best life altering decision. It's like you can just test something out and like if it doesn't work, it's just gonna show you that it didn't work and kind of redirect you to another path, I guess. So I think that's something that's been really, really nice for me to just kind of remind myself. And I think also give
Mhm.
myself grace then of like if I make a decision and it actually didn't go as planned, like that's okay. I'm a human.
Mhm.
We don't always make like perfection and everything is impossible. Like we're not going to
Yeah.
make the perfect choice or whatever all the time, and just kind of have grace for ourselves and realize that like, yeah, sometimes things don't go to plan and sometimes they end up working out way better than we could have thought. So just kind of leaning on that.
Yeah. Do you feel like there are things that you can't like if you get stuck in that kind of spiral of thinking of like, okay, like I need to make the next decision, like ways that you are able to kind of like stop your brain and just like sit in it for a little bit and like take a step back?
Yeah, I'm really bad for that. And I think in the past, I've just been like, I'm just gonna like go run or go push myself or go do like some big bikepacking trip or whatever. And I'm just like, wait, I
Mhm.
actually just have to like sit in this and like be uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
that's something I'm still working through. And I think everyone to an extent, like that's a lifelong thing of not trying to like run away from like literally or figuratively run away from these
Definitely. Yeah.
um, so I think that's where my yoga practice has been a huge, huge, huge thing. Especially, I was pretty burnt out about 2 years ago, or the end of like the beginning or middle of 2023. I was so burnt out and like didn't know if I was going to keep guiding, and and I think I was just pushing myself at such a crazy extent, and not even necessarily in the running part, but just like mentally, like all just like go 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 kind of mentality, and wasn't really listening to my body's signs of like, you're burnt out. And yoga, I've always been so consistent with my yoga practice, but then when I was guiding, you're on with people 24/7 that I was like,
Yeah.
so I started to push that to the wayside. And then when I wasn't guiding, I'd be super consistent with it again. And then I'd go back to guiding and kind of not be able to anymore. And I could just sense such a difference in how I felt if I was like getting on my yoga mat.
Mhm.
Uh, so that was, I think, when I started to feel really burnt out. I was like, I don't care if I'm with people all the time. Like, I will wake up 30 minutes earlier and like
Mhm.
just get on my mat. And I've been doing that every day since, yeah, the end of or kind of middle 2023. And it has made a world of difference. And it's not even so much the physical practice of getting on the mat, but it's just like this practice or this promise that I've kept
Mhm.
to myself of like, I'm going to get on my mat. Some days it's 40 minutes. Some days it's like, oh, I have like 15 minutes before I have to meet clients, like just go
Yeah.
quickly. But I think just that promise and that's kind of like allowed me to slow down. And then when I do get kind of all these like whirling thoughts of overwhelm, I'm like, hey, I can just sit on that. I'm like, it's okay, it's okay. So that's been a huge piece.
Yeah, I was talking with another friend about that too, and like she was talking about her yoga practice and like how it just is such a good kind of like area of life too that you can practice like deciding like, okay, am I going to stay in this hard pose or am I going to stop this pose? And like how that translates to like, okay, now I'm like in a tough spot in a decision in life. But just because I show up to my yoga mat every single day, like I'm putting myself in a situation like that. And so then when you do hit that, it's like, okay, I've experienced this to an extent. Now I can like just take a breath and like move forward.
Because it's the one movement that I found in my life that I think is not so much tied to the movement piece of it. Like it is, but it
Mhm.
isn't. And I think it's the one thing that doesn't feel like it's exercise, or where it's just allowing me to like, then I can still push myself where it is like I'm physically pushing my body, and I do really like strong practices. But then it also, that side of it has allowed me to show more grace to myself than I ever have in any other sport before, or any other sense of movement, which then I think exactly what you were saying, where then it's like you can bring that into other aspects of your life. And I think the grace piece is like the biggest missing piece. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and like with running, like how has your relationship been with running over the years? Like I imagine with guiding and having that be such a huge part of like your livelihood that it could just all get like
Oh yeah,
all mixed up. Yeah.
it's so funny because I started running when I was 10, and right from the get-go I started performing really well. I was getting a medal at every race I was doing early on.
Mhm.
And I think I got debilitating anxiety because I had this like, I have to perform every race, and I'm getting third, and now I'm should I get second, and oh, I got fifth in
Mhm.
this one, and like now I need to get third again or whatever, and like what it would it mean to get first in a race. And at around 16, I developed a really bad eating disorder, as this is not an uncommon story between runners. And definitely struggled with that on and off for quite a while, to the point where I was actually in an outpatient program when I was in university for 2 years. So I had to take
Mhm.
a total kind of step back from that. And then I used to race road half marathons with my dad, and I think that was really nice because it was out of the like school system of like racing against girls, and it was just like, and I think that's where, because I always kind of had like not feeling like I could like be as fast as someone else or how they compared to me and everything. And I think I just was really stuck in that comparison trap of running when I was, yeah, kind of high school. And
Yeah.
then doing half marathons with my dad was just so nice because it was just, at the time, a half marathon felt like such a big thing, and just such a big accomplishment. And to get to do it with my dad just was so special. And I think it really kind of helped me have a healthier relationship things with things again. And then university, definitely the eating disorder just kind of was quite rampant, and went to the outpatient clinic, and that helped so much.
Mhm.
It's just a huge, that's where like meditation came into my life. I had the best therapist, and kind of that's when yoga started playing in too. And then it wasn't until, oh, and then when I kind of started getting into like trail and ultra running, I was like, oh man, this is where it's at. Mostly because it's like trail running and ultra running, you can't compare. Even now, if we have runners on our trips and they're like, what's your PR for this or that? I'm just like, what are you talking about?
You can't compare anything.
Whereas like 1 kilometer could take me 5 minutes, the next could be 30 minutes. It depends on
Yeah.
the, and I think for me, it's, I started having such a healthier outlook because I'm like, oh, for me now, running is just getting to experience these beautiful places, and it's not about
Mhm.
like even, and it's so funny because even on our trips, I can always tell people get quite anxious if they're like it's the first time they're on a trip, and they're just like, oh, like so I think I might be the slowest person, or like, oh, I've done Boston 7 times and all this other stuff. And I always say to people, I'm just like, not to be rude, but like no one gives a shit about how
Yeah, like it does not matter at all.
it's like that's not why we're here to run. We're here to, and I get like I have my own aspirations, I have my own goals and like things that I want to achieve and everything. But I think aside from like pacing and everything, once I started getting that out of my mind around running, I just had such a healthier relationship to running. Um,
Mhm.
and it's funny now too because when I'm not getting trips, I don't run very often. And that's also just because I'm like dealing with some like health stuff that I'm like trying to slow down a little bit, which has been like totally fine. But it has just been nice to see kind of this transition in how I view like what place running takes in my life and everything. So I think it really used to eat away at me, and now just feels like a healthier way to just get to like see beautiful spots and
Yeah. Well, and then so then how did you get into biking? Like going on a huge
yeah, that's
biking trip is no small feat. And then wait, didn't you just do like a big biking in Spain adventure this last year?
yeah, so it's funny because I finished university, and my ex, who I did the bikepacking trip with, he finished, I think, 2 years ahead of me.
Mhm.
And the summer before, I did a solo through hike. So I hiked from the southernmost tip of Iceland to the northern tip. Um,
Mhm.
and that it was like my first through hike, and I just was like, I want to go to Iceland, but Iceland's expensive. So if I just walk and camp everywhere, it'll be cheap.
And yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I did that, and then I was like, there's something about this through hiking thing. Like, I just love like, and especially interior Iceland, like there is
Mhm.
nothing, there's nobody, there's no towns. It is just completely wild. Like you feel like you're on another planet. And I just love the solitude of it that I was like, I want to do another through hike. And then my ex wanted to also afterwards, we're like, we're selling our stuff, we're going to do a big trip of some sort. And I was like, I want to do a through hike. And we didn't know where to go, and we were kind of toying with the idea of going to Mongolia. Um, and walking across Mongolia, and Mongolia is huge. And there is
Yeah.
no, like, we'd have to carry like weeks worth of food,
Oh
and we
my
were looking at
gosh.
all these different things. We were looking at like buying camels and like walking camels across so they
Oh
could
my gosh.
look at all these different things. And then that's kind of when we found out about bike packing, and we're like, oh, we could bike across.
You could have a bike instead of a camel.
And
Yeah.
exactly, one less thing to feed. And but we were just looking at that. And I think for me, the one thing I loved about through hiking and running and biking and all of it is it's like it's a self-propelled adventure where you are feeling every change in the landscape. If there's an uphill, you're feeling it. If there's a
Mhm.
descent, you're feeling it. If there's a change in the weather and pattern, if there's the ecosystem or the environment is different, like you're feeling all of that gradually. And I really,
Yeah.
really that part of it. So I really want to keep that piece. And with the biking, that could happen. But then you could also like feel that gradual movement. You're still super vulnerable to the elements, but you can also go faster. And you're not going to do like 30 to 40 kilometers a day. You could do like over 100 and everything.
Yeah.
Just that just seems so much more likely. So we were looking at what it would be to bike to Mongolia. And then we just opened like a whole can of worms researching all about biking and bike packing. And it was before bike packing like even really was like a really big thing, because now I think it's really
Mhm.
blown up. My ex was like, why don't we bike to Mongolia? And I just remember looking at him and I was like, I mean, yeah, sure. And then we started like going down to this like these deep like archives online and like different forums of like people who had like been biking around the world for years and years and years. And
Mhm.
we just got hooked. We were just like, this is what we want to do. Like this is both ridiculous but so incredible. And that's what we did. We spent months of planning, and we bought hardtail mountain bikes with the anticipation of like, we do not want to be on a road where there's vehicles.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Like we want not only biking to China, but like we want to do it the hard way, it seemed.
Yeah.
So like had mountain bikes and like tried to like piece together like old Forest Service roads, or like
Mhm.
some hiking trails that maybe weren't too technical, a lot of backcountry roads, stuff like that. And yeah, we just kind of kitted out the bikes and everything. And I do like that was one of the hardest and most wonderful things I've done in my life. And I think being on the brink of like potentially an ending relationship was definitely a
I
challenge.
was just about to say, like, that's one of those things too, where like you really have to like that person.
Yeah, and we were together for 4.5 years. Well, we were together for 5.5 years, and then broke up. So it was kind of the last year of our
Was it the
relationship.
bike packing that broke it up?
Like I always say to people, I was just like, you want to know if you're right for someone. No, honestly, like even to this day, he's a fantastic guy and everything. But I think there were just things, and like I was so young at the time too.
Yeah.
So um, I think it was just we wanted different things kind of coming out of the trip and everything. So yeah, but I think I still just like I look at that trip and I just think of like young baby Kara doing it and everything. And I'm so grateful, even though it was so hard. I'm just like, I think that was like the one thing that like, even, I mean, doing the through hike in Iceland was great, but it was short lived. But like doing this long tour in places like East Russia where everyone was just like, you can't go there, you can't do this, or like Mongolia,
Yeah.
it's not safe and all that. And like, we just experienced so much kindness, so much hospitality. And I think just like time and time again, we were so challenged, but we just kind of
Mhm.
at it. And I think it just really kind of opened my eyes of like, again, this concept of like, there's so many beautiful ways to live in this world. There's so many different
Mhm.
ways. One way is not necessarily always better than the next. And people are wonderful. And even though the world is messy and hard and feels broken in a lot of ways, like there is so much goodness.
Mhm.
And just going back to this concept of like, we really can kind of like design our own lives, and we don't have to fit in this like perfect little box of like what I think. I always feel like this pressure whenever I come back here. I'm just like, oh man, like I don't know. I don't know if I want kids, like, oh, this and that, like relationships, oh, like jobs, all this stuff. And
Yeah.
like, but when you're out there, like life was so simple. And I think it just really kind of um, got to show me like what, or kind of make me, I guess, analyze like what is important, what values do I want to kind of like have instilled in my own life and kind of carry forward and everything. So I do attribute, I think, that bike trip to kind of being like the stepping stone that just kind of was the continuation
Mhm.
what these last 8 years have been. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then I definitely took a break off of bikepacking. I did a few smaller trips in like BC and everything with some friends. But I kind of went wholeheartedly into run guiding then. And it wasn't until this last year that I was like, I miss the bike a lot. And I think maybe a little bit of a burnout of like just running and everything. And
Mhm.
went on a 2 week solo bikepacking trip in Andalusia in southern Spain and pieced together old GPX tracks from a 1,000 kilometer mountain bike race that goes there every year,
Mhm.
gravel race, and added a few more sections, kind of did other little pieces. And I am so hooked on bikepacking again. Like it just is like, and I think again, like I've been running so much that just to do something different. But again, I just love the sense of like self-supported. Not to say like I'm against going with people, but there's something about doing solo trips that is just like I think I love because you just if anything happens, like
It's on you.
yeah, you need to be self-reliant and like
Yeah.
figure your shit out. Whereas when you're with someone else, it's really easy to try and lean on them and everything. So it was, and I don't want to say it was easy, but I'm like biking in Europe feels so cush in comparison to like if something
Totally.
happens in East Russia, like you could be 500 kilometers to the next like village of
Yeah.
50 people. Whereas
Yeah.
Spain, it's just like
It's like, oh,
even
I'm gonna go grab a little coffee.
yeah, exactly. It's like even if you feel like you're out there, like you can probably get a really good coffee or like some I don't know some
Definitely.
the
Yeah.
next kilometers or something. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, it was really fun, and I definitely have plans to do more of it this year and everything. So,
Mhm. Yeah, how are you kind of like looking at this year as like piecing together the guiding and then like personal aspirations and
yeah, yeah,
trips?
yeah. Yeah, so I will be in Morocco all of February. I don't know what I'm doing for March yet. But again, this is where I'm like, I still figure it out. Like I will figure it out and everything. I'm probably going to Asia to potentially build a new trip and everything, and then I'll be back in Morocco in April. And then
Mhm.
I think do some bike packing in May if I can sort that out. And then I'll be in the Balkans all of June guiding. And then the summer, try and be a bit more in North America, having the truck camper, everything. And
Right.
then in BC and kind of staying in that region before I go to
Mhm.
Europe. And then always the back half of the year, I'm always probably my busiest with guiding between Kenya, South Africa, and Morocco's or back-to-back Morocco trips.
Mhm.
So kind of from September to leading into December is pretty heavy on the guiding. So yeah, it's still this year is still very full on with guiding. But it honestly, I think 2023 Kara was like, Kara, you need to stop. Like you're so burnt out. And even though I know I do want to find a home base and everything, like right now things are just feeling good.
It's
And
working.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's exactly
Yeah.
like even though I have this like goal that I'm working towards of like potentially getting a home base, like where I am right now feels really good. So like
Mhm.
I need to like mess that up or not mess it up, but like change it right now. Like if it's working,
Yeah.
just it. And again, kind of with this like test reiterate thing, it's like, hey, after a while, if I'm just like burnt out, then I can like try something new and everything. But in terms of the run guiding, it has been really good and really enjoying the company I'm working with, the people I work with. So I'm feeling very fortunate in that regard. So yeah, I just very much appreciate living unconventionally. Like, not having people tell me like you need to do X, Y, Z and everything. I was like, I will get to these things as I like or not. And they're good.
Definitely. In 2023, when you were feeling really burnt out, what was it that kind of like accumulated that?
Yeah, I think when I was working with the company with Nathan, when it was the ultra running trips, then with the other company I changed to, it was smaller mile or like less mileage. So I was like, this is going to be good. But it
Mhm.
ended up me being in like a different continent like every 2 to 3 weeks. And I
Mhm.
think even though I'd been traveling full time before that, it was like slower travel. And this was just every day. Like it just felt like moving,
Yeah.
moving. And like whether it's in a different guest house or different country, different continent again, being on another airplane.
Mhm.
That just felt like a lot. And I think too, then I was just at the same time, I was like training all these different locations. And now for me, like when I go to Morocco, it feels like home. When I go to South Africa, like I know it's
Totally.
all these
Yeah.
places. So even though I'm still kind of moving at that rate, every country I go back to now has that depth a bit more where it's like I'm
Mhm.
coming back and it doesn't feel like the like, oh, new. Like it still feels new and
Yes.
exciting and everything, but not to the extent where it feels like an overwhelm of my senses where it's like, oh man, this is too much. Now it's just like, it feels really nice to be in this buzz. Like this feels so familiar. And like I know where like the ATMs are. I know the currency exchange, like all this different stuff. Like I can speak small words in Arabic
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And um it just has helped me feel more grounded in those places that I think at first was just like it was overwhelmed all the time. So it's funny because that's where people always ask me like how many countries I've been to. I have no idea. And I think in the past it'd be like I would maybe want to be like, yeah, like how many countries can I go to? But for me, it's like it's not really about like ticking off this list. And I think even though it's like I love to go new places and stuff like that, kind of going back to this depth piece, and like there's something so nice about like now I'm going back to Morocco. I think it's like my seventh or eighth time this February or more. And I think in the past, old Kara would have been like, oh no, go to Morocco once. And then like all those other 8 times, you could have like hit different countries. But I'm
Mhm.
like, no. Now every time I go there, it's like I have that family that I work with there. And
Mhm.
so much more special than just like crossing off another country for the sake of crossing it off. So
Yeah. It's having home everywhere you go, much more so than like, oh,
totally.
this is totally new. Because yeah, that I imagine can, and it just does get overwhelming.
Yeah, and I always feel like it's funny. I feel like I always have to be cognizant of who I say this to. And now that I'm saying this on a podcast, I'm like, all right. But, but it's funny because I think I never want to complain about this lifestyle because I am so wildly grateful. And I just feel so fortunate to the people that I get to meet, like what I get to do for work and everything. But I also think people always say, like, oh, you're living the dream or this or that. Or I think
Mhm.
it's really easy to, just make it out bigger than it is. And I think in a sense, people don't realize that it is very challenging too. And like I think there are a lot of sacrifices that people are like, oh, I wish I could be doing that. But I really don't know if everyone would want to be doing this
Mhm.
to the extent where it's like I was saying, like you don't have a lot of like again, dating really hard. Not having your coffee mug, like you're sleeping in a different bed. You are literally out of a backpack all the time. It's like your biggest joy in the week is like when you get to do laundry and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people don't really realize the trade-offs and they just again like social media all that stuff is like we're looking at the highlights. So of course when it's like, oh, you're running on this beautiful mountain ridge, you're going to this country again, like of course that's the stuff that people really are gonna focus on. But I think there is a lot of challenges with it too, and I never want to bring that up to be like I'm complaining about it because these are my choices. But I also just think it's important to recognize that like every decision that people make in life are going to have wonderful, like beautiful,
Trade-offs. Yeah.
but then there also are pieces that are really challenging and everything. And I think it's just important to mention that just so people can kind of see that like we're all human. Like no one is immune to like hard days and challenges and everything. Like there's so many beautiful parts of life, but it also is riddled with like very
Everybody has crappy parts of life too. You
exactly.
can also have crappy parts of life in pretty places too. So yeah, I know, and like that's honestly like part of my whole vision of the podcast too, where it's like, okay, maybe you see somebody on Instagram or like you've heard of somebody and like it's so easy to just like look at the pictures and like read the words and be like, wow, like that's perfect. But it's like, yeah, there's so much that you don't see. And like with the travel piece of it too, it's just like, you spend 2 whole days of your week maybe trying to like get to a new place and then settle in and drop all your, and it's just like, it's not that easy, seamless thing that like people probably imagine it can be. How do you deal with kind of like the rest and like stress of the guy and like really like that travel logistical piece, and like how do you deal with the flights, and are there things that you feel like you have like found that it's like, okay, this is, this is like a reliable way to get me through the travel and all of the ups and downs of that, or is it kind of like, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work?
Totally. Yeah, that's a good question. Again, still something trying to balance and everything, but I think I'm someone I've learned through and through that like I need my sleep. I
Mhm.
need sleep and I'm very protective of my energy when it comes to like being able to make sure I have a good sleep. So I'm
Yeah.
sort of a morning person. No matter how much I try and sleep in, I just always wake up early. but I cannot stay up late. And I think when I started guiding more, especially with the international trips, because a lot of people like it's their one vacation, they want to go out, they want to like
Totally.
late and everything. And I think for me as a guide, I was like, oh man, like I'm like the leader. I need to be like make sure that I'm like part of this and then all that other stuff. And maybe it's the older I've gotten, but also the longer I've been doing it, I'm like, I don't have to go out late and like be up late every single night just with all of that, especially because it's like if it was like this is their one trip a year, of course they want to do it. But if I'm doing this back to back, dozens of trips in a year, it's just not sustainable. So I think me being able to um call it a night at 8:30 and not feel guilty. And I think that's something that I still kind of struggle on and off being feeling that guilt piece. And then
Mhm.
know like this is me then being better for it later on throughout the week and everything. So yeah, I think that's been a huge thing trying to like protect that kind of rest piece and make sure that I'm getting the rest that I need. So 'cause
Mhm.
younger Kara would just like push through, and I'm just like, yeah, yeah. If you're doing that for
That's how we got to burnout. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think that's a big piece. So, and then I try and find like little senses of like, because I think anyone does well with routine. And because I feel like my life is anything but routine and it's very inconsistent, I try and find little pieces of routine. So,
Mhm.
whether that be like when I am like, say, I have an apartment in Morocco in between, like just doing little like day to day routines and everything that I would kind
Mhm.
of do otherwise. And like having my morning practice for yoga in the morning and like trying to journal, read before bed, like just little things that feel like I'd be doing this at home. So like I can do it here. So it
Mhm.
does just feel a bit more familiar. I think that's kind of helped me just feel in a more restful state.
Yeah. And do you feel like because have you been kind of consistently with like having like more of like an off beginning of the year and then like slowly getting back into guiding and then it like kind of ramps up and then is like super heavy at the end of the year?
Every year's different.
Yeah.
Before I was guiding on New Year's Eve into
Okay.
like New Year's Eve, we started a trip on New Year's Eve, and then the first 2 weeks in January, I was guiding, and then went straight to Morocco like 2 weeks later. So it honestly depends. And then I had like a kind of a open spring and then a back heavy. So I'd say this year and last, I have a heavier back end, just with how our Africa trips kind of go in the fall. Um, but it's super inconsistent. My whole like these past 8 years of travel have been so inconsistent that I'm like, I can't really like me
See
working
a
up
theme
being
to it.
the most consistent thing, but like it
Yeah.
also so but I like that. And I think I even with the thought of like me, if I were to get a home base eventually, like I'm someone who I very much struggle with the thought of like people having careers for 40 years or living in your forever home and stuff like that. And like and I think if people find that and they like that, then I'm like, who am I to say otherwise? Like, I think that's fantastic. But for me,
Mhm.
I would struggle with the idea of just like, this is going to be my job until I retire, or I'm going to buy this house until I retire and do all this stuff. I'm like, I love, even like these last 8 years, I love how versatile and how much variety they have and how many different like people I've got to meet and things. And even though I do want a bit more stability in the sense of like finding that community piece that feels
Mhm.
like I can build depth in that. I still don't want that to then like go a 180-degree turn where all of a sudden I'm in one place. I have that community and I have that sense of community that I've been wanting, but now I just feel like I am
I'm
kind of
stuck.
stuck in a place too. And I
Yeah.
think maybe I need to like work on like how I phrase that in my own mind or like my perspective of it. Cause I think sometimes it's like that isn't a bad thing either. And what our perspective is around things is really important. But trying to find that balance for sure.
Do you feel like there's people I don't know, I feel like I've found there's there's people that I can chat with and they totally understand what I'm doing and they're like, "Yeah, that totally makes sense." And then there's people that like can't comprehend it. So why don't you just move into a house? And I'm like, "Well, that's not exactly what I feel like I should be doing right now." And like, I don't know, do you feel like you have like how do you deal with some of those conversations or do you feel like yeah.
Yeah, they're very present for sure.
Yes.
And I feel like because I'm not in Canada very often and I'm just like traveling in the world, that I just feel like I meet more people who are like minded. So I don't struggle with that as much. And then when I do come
Mhm.
back and maybe around family or that, and again, I love my family so dearly, but also I think that's where I feel that most kind of like, so like, what are you doing? And I think I used to take it a lot more personally when I was
Mhm.
younger and everything. And now I just have to remind myself that it's like people, again, with this, like people shitting on you and everything, it's like people want what they think is best for you, but only you know what's best for you. And it's really hard when there's so much noise from what your parents are saying, what your cousin is saying, what other people
Yeah,
are saying, what social media is saying. And it's like you need to try and quiet that noise and kind of be like, hey, what do I want without all of the noise in the background and everything? And that's like a continual practice because it also changes as you're changing.
totally.
But yeah, I think the biggest thing is I just need to remind myself of like, this is my life. And I always say to people, it's like, stay in your own lane because it's like, as long I think there's like very, like, and I think a lot of times people are saying it out of like a caring way or they want what's best for you. But again, it's like,
Yeah.
you know that. And even though your auntie or your grandma is saying something that they do think is like, trying to care for you, it's like only you know that, and
Mhm.
just have to like lean into that. And it's so hard. It's so hard, but it's just kind of continual practice of like slowing down, checking in, and kind of moving through that. So
Yeah. Yeah, turning down the noise, getting on the yoga mat.
yes, yes, yes. Journaling
Yeah.
too. Journaling and writing is another piece, a huge piece.
Do you feel like what have there been some really big things over the last couple years that you're like, "Wow, okay, this is definitely not how I was looking at either, like, the way you're living or, like, I don't know, like, big thoughts that you have, like, grown into, I guess."
I mean, yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think just again going back to that point of just like um there's so many ways to live a life and no one is better than the others and just need to kind of come back to what feels best for you. I think that's probably been one of the biggest thing. And again, like the grace piece. I think grace is
Yeah.
and just recognizing that like um we are all human and being human means that there's wonderful parts of life, but there's also really challenging parts of life, no matter what situation you're in and everything. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think in recognizing that, then that's just allowed me to be a lot more gracious with myself. And being more gracious with myself has allowed me to, I think, sustain this more when I was just trying to like white knuckle and like push through anything hard. Actually allowing myself to like feel uncomfortable emotion has been a big thing. Just being able to like, yeah, no, this is good. Feel the emotions, like let things move through you. And yeah, I think that's been a huge part of then just being able to kind of sustain it a bit longer and kind of continue through. So
What would you like to leave people on today?
I know I've said this so many times on the podcast already or on this episode already, but I really think just like slowing down and tuning into what I think you need is best and kind of following through with that and just realizing that like any decision you make in life, there's going to be really wonderful, beautiful parts of it, but also a lot of challenges. But you're kind of choosing those and everything. And I think as adults, we're really bad at being beginners or trying to like start something new and everything or go travel abroad alone or do like your first bikepacking trip and everything. But I don't think that should stop us from even trying and starting because I think we will be able to kind of surprise ourselves with like what you can actually do once you
Mhm.
have those doors and everything. So yeah, I guess just not being afraid to start.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Also, please reach out and give feedback. This is really just something that has been such a fun project. And so anything really helps. If you like the podcast, let me know. If you don't, also let me know. Or if you have any friends or family members or yeah, anybody that you're like, oh, Gracie, you should totally reach out to these people. So yeah, I hope that everybody has a wonderful Monday and wonderful week or whenever you're listening to this and whatever day that is. Okay, bye.